Many of the elements of what we now understand to be a modern state were already in place in China in the 3rd century BC, some 1800 years before they emerged in Europe. It is for this reason that I begin my account of the emergence of the state in China. China succeeded in developing a centralized, uniform system of bureaucratic administration that was capable of governing a huge population and territory when compared to Mediterranean Europe. China had already invented a system of impersonal, merit-based bureaucratic recruitment that was far more systemic than Roman public administration. While the total population of the Chinese Empire was roughly comparable to that of the Roman Empire, the Chinese put a far larger proportion of its people under a uniform set of rules than did the Romans. Fukuyama explains that the driver for Chinese state development was the permanent vicious warfare between the various Chinese states for 500 years, from 750 BC to 250 BC. This constant large-scale warfare meant that the Chinese states had to develop powerful government institutions in order to survive. In contrast, the wars between European states during this period were far less intense. The armies fighting wars in Europe during this period were one order of magnitude smaller than they were in China, hundreds of thousands in China, and tens of thousands in Europe. Sometimes the number of casualties in Chinese wars was higher than the total fighting forces in European wars. The Chinese states were having to constantly mobilize a large proportion of the male population. The wars had to be financed by ruthlessly extracting a large amount of taxes from their populations. These tremendous pressures led the Chinese states to develop powerful bureaucratic institutions. China lacked the rule of law. One of the reasons for the Chinese wars being so vicious was because ordinary people living in the Chinese states had very little control over their government. This was in sharp contrast to other parts of the world at the time. In the West, in India, and in the Muslim world, there was a body of pre-existing law, sanctified by religion and safeguarded by a hierarchy of priests and clerics that was prior to and independent of the state. This law was seen as being older, higher, and more legitimate than the current ruler, and therefore binding on him. That is the meaning of the rule of law. Even the king or emperor is bound by law and not free to do as he pleases. Rule of law in this sense never existed in China. As a result, large-scale state violence was common in early Chinese history. The Qin state was able to defeat all of the other states and finally establish a unified China by 221 BC. The unified, powerful Chinese state would go on to achieve many impressive things, such as the Great Wall of China. However, the Chinese state was very dictatorial and was at times very ruthless towards its own population. In the 19th century, the Chinese state was just about strong enough to resist European colonization, despite China's military forces being technologically far inferior to European forces. The Chinese state repeatedly fought to a standstill the large Russian army in the north. The Chinese state made tactical withdrawals to European naval powers along the Pacific coast, but held on to the Chinese hinterland.